What's up, you guys? Your boy Ben Mahari here, represent Mahari Nation Sports Podcast. Much love to the entire LDBC and the football community. We're gonna talk about in this case here, guys. Um, like I said, we got the NBA season coming up, in a couple of days, and quick note for you guys. My basketball conversations episode is going to be on Christmas Eve at 9 p.m. Central Time. Okay, since Christmas is going to be this Friday, and I'm going to be spending time with the family, we're going to push it for Thursday night at 9 p.m. Central Time. So check the note for the change of date in during that particular time this week. But with that being said, let's get down to business here, shall we? So I actually been wanting to talk about this, for about a couple of days, for about since yesterday, but I didn't have time to do it. But since I got the time, let's talk about this, shall we? So, Randy Moss came out on the record and claims that he's the greatest wide receiver of all time. All right, he claims that he's the GOAT. Okay, so in a recent podcast that he did with Terrell Owens, which I suggest you guys check it out because it's a really awesome podcast. Um, he pretty much Randy Moss said on the record that he puts himself first, T.O. second, and probably Jerry Rice third or fourth on that Friday. Um, he talked about how Ross talked about how I'm not talking about dominating the game and changing the game of football. I don't live on statistics because if you live on statistics and live on championships, that's all political. Now, pretty much people have been have been taking different opinions about what Randy Moss had to say. Now Jerry Rice's son um took to Twitter and pretty much had to argue on his father's behalf, and pretty much said most talented, of course, Moss, but not the GOAT. Now I had the opportunity to watch the majority of Randy Moss's career and also Terrell Owens' career. Now I never seen Jerry Rice during his earlier days in his career, with the San Francisco 49ers, but on the later half when he was with the Oakland Raiders, when he was pretty much, old at this particular point. So I have, some of the stats here that we're talking about here, but not like in terms of watching him play and all that. Moss and T.O., absolutely. Now, for the most part, okay, I remember when Terrell Owens and Randy Moss came into the league. Okay, T.O. came into the league in '96. He wasn't, highly, you know, you know, he was not highly touted, coming into his draft because playing at, UTC Chattanooga, an FES school, during that time, NFL scouts weren't heavy on those type of schools, and that's why he was dropped, to the third round in the 96 draft by the San Francisco 49ers. Um, with Randy Moss, on the other hand, you know what I'm saying? He was a highly touted wide receiver coming in the 98 draft that featured, Peyton Manning and the infamous Ryan Leaf and also Charles Woodson. But he dropped down to the draft as very surprisingly. Um, when you look at Randy Moss's career and how it's pretty much how it started, okay, there were a lot of teams that really didn't want to take a chance on him because of his his documented legal problems, which I've always found it to be a crock of BS. But the team that pretty much sided on passing him the most was the Dallas Cowboys. In fact, Moss wanted to play for the Dallas Cowboys and ended up passing them by. But you know the Vikings took a chance on him with the 21st pick in the draft. And that rookie year in 98, I will remember it like it was yesterday. Um, Randy Moss pretty much took the league pretty much by storm in his rookie year, okay, with 17 touchdowns, okay? 17 TDs, the most by any rookie. He basically shattered the record for yards, as a rookie. He had 1,313 yards with 69 receptions and was targeted 124 times. All right. And remember, that 98 Minnesota team had the number one rated offense in the league. You think about this for a moment. You had a, a Randall Cunningham who played his best football of his life. You had Chris Carter, who was on the pursuit of being the all-time leader, a single season leader in terms of receptions of a couple of years back. All right. You had Robert Smith. Then you had Randy Moss, who pretty much torched the NFL and made defensive backs look like fools. All right. This guy literally took the game by storm. In fact, one of my favorite moments of my life watching Randy Moss play was on Thanksgiving Day when Moss catch three passes for 163 yards and three touchdowns, all of them for 50 plus. All right, and was the first rookie ever to score three touchdowns on Thanksgiving. All right, he was pretty much took the league by storm. You know what I'm saying? But with To on the other hand, it took him a while for him, to get things going because the thing with To was that To had the reputation of not having most reliable hands. He would drop a lot of passes. But that one key catch that he had in the 98 playoffs against the Green Bay Packers pretty much took his career, literally legitimately by storm. And pretty much after that, he started becoming more of the same persona of To that we all, come to know by. Okay. But the one thing I loved about what To was that the difference between To and Randy was Randy, to me, had his switch sometimes off when it came down to really wanting to play. One of the quotes that I remember the most was is that he said, "I play when I want to play," and To's engine was always on every time he played. Now, sure, it could come across as arrogant, and sometimes it can be a bit of self-serving. But the thing is, To played with an anger and played with intensity and fire that really showed a lot when he basically played. Okay, particularly when he was in Philadelphia. That was his best years of his career by far. It's particularly at that 2004 year, because in all honesty, if To never played for that team in 2004, the Eagles don't make the Super Bowl. That's a legitimate fact. All right, I'd rather have To's intensity every time, every day of the week. Okay, but we're talking about greatest wide receivers of all time. In fact, the thing with Jerry Rice was is that Jerry Rice pretty much was a guy that you know set various NCAA records in terms of receiving yards, receptions, and touchdowns. But he was reported as slow on the 40-yard dash, and it was reported that it was basically he reported as a slow 40-yard dash score of 4.71 seconds. But nonetheless, the San Francisco 49ers pretty much, you know, took a chance on him, basically drafted him with the 16th pick. But the thing that I loved about what Jerry Rice was is that with Jerry Rice he was a sure-handed wide receiver and would catch passes any way you want him, deep routes, the quick slant. He was more known for his yardage after the catch, and pretty much throughout his entire career. He was pretty much one of the most consistent wide receivers. He was average. He basically went through a stretch where he had basically one. Let's count: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 straight seasons of 1,000 yards. All right, and let's get something straight here, okay? Jerry Rice is still the career leader in career receptions, receiving yards, touchdowns, and total career touchdowns, and he's a massive of career of 23,546 all-purpose yards. All right, Jerry Rice is still to this day the standard of basically of what a wide receiver should be. You know what I'm saying? Now look, I love me some Randy Moss, and there were times where I've always felt that Randy Moss was basically, it was only a matter of time before he started breaking those records. But the problem with Moss, and I know this off of firsthand experience because I was a Vikings fan, there were times where Moss would sometimes take his foot off the gas pedal and not try to, put his best effort out there when it came down to making those key plays when it mattered most. Now, sure, football is not like basketball where a one player can make a difference in helping your team win or lose. But at the same time, the perception about what Moss was is that sometimes Moss came across as a guy that didn't really put his best foot forward, but ended up having these great years when he had basically 15 to 16 touchdowns throughout his career. You know what I'm saying? And there were times where I felt like Moss could be better in terms of playing much more of effort out there. That's what I kind of perceived it as. You know what I'm saying? But regardless of that, throughout his career, throughout his Minnesota career, with Randy during his time in Minnesota, he had pretty much a rack clips 9,300 yards, All right, 92 touchdowns, and also caught 587 passes. That's pretty impressive in my view. All right. Now, what happened in Oakland was pretty much a travesty because let's be real, no team was ever going to do anything, and no other player could have done anything what was going on in Oakland, considering how much of a joke Oakland was as a franchise. You know what I mean? And it wasn't until he returned back to New England where he pretty much regained his old form, when he pretty much broke his record of a career high in touchdowns, when he pretty much scored 23 touchdowns during his time with New England, and pretty much was on the verge of being undefeated until losing in the Super Bowl. But the one thing that I always respected about with Moss was that he was pretty much an athletic genetic freak. He would catch passes in the deep ball situation and would just go over the top of you against smaller defenders. The Packers were the Packers hated facing against Moss. Literally hated facing him because he would just jump over the top of their small DBs and make them look like fools. There was a reason why they pursued guys like Mike McKenzie and Al Harris, guys that could match his height, his speed, and his jumping ability. With T.O., on the other hand, with T.O., he was excellent in terms of yards after the catch. He would catch, the quick slant passes. He would catch deep passes, but he had that rage and anger where he would pretty much would punish you and pretty much can punish you, in basically in one-on-one coverage, and pretty much make you look like a fool, like a running back with those quick feet in terms of and his powerful upper body strength to pretty much thwart off of you when he can get himself into the end zone. So if you ask me, where do I rank these wide receivers in terms of all-time great wide receivers? Jerry Rice, for me, is still number one. He still holds the majority of the records, and he's got the rings to back it up. And so, yes, he played in a system where pretty much he benefited from playing with a great coach in Bill Walsh and a great quarterback in Joe Montana and Steve Young. But still, you still got to catch those passes. You still got to be able to do your job as a wide receiver. And he did it better than any other wide receiver in the history of the National Football League. All right. With Randy, he's a Hall of Famer, but some people could say that he didn't really, succeed what his potential could have been when he started out his career. I disagree with that. I think for him, with Randy, he pretty much maxed out in terms of what he could do. You know, the thing with Randy is that Randy, did what he could with the players that he was given with. But if he had like the consistency that Jerry Rice had when he was in San Francisco, he would shatter all records. Literally shatter it. The same could be said with T.O. Now, I will always defend T.O. when it came down to the whole situation with Donovan McNabb. And the way that it went down was pretty much distasteful to me. Now, T.O. could have been better in terms of, handling things a little bit more maturely. But listen, when you got a quarterback that's not willing to back you up in terms of your whole contract situation, and you did it, and basically the quarterback does it with another player, I mean, that would piss me off too. So I will always side with T.O. in terms of that. But it's not about that. It's about the wide receivers. The point is, I think that Randy Moss was probably reaching a little bit, in terms of, overhyping himself again, because he pretty much felt like he was always playing under the shadow of what Jerry Rice was able to do. But to me, they're all Hall of Famers. They're both great in terms of what they were able to do on the football field. But I hate to go against Randy, but I have to in this case. I'm sticking with Jerry Rice in this case. With the records that he was able to set forth, to championships, and what he's able to do throughout his entire career, during a career which pretty much stretched a total of pretty much uh, 21 years. I mean, that's pretty much impressive in itself. So I I had to go with Jerry Rice in this case, and pretty much put Moss second and To third. And so that's where my rank is in terms of great wide receivers. I know a lot of you guys have a different opinion about who's the greatest wide receiver of all time, but to me, I got to stick with Jerry Rice in this case. Despite despite some of the athletic limitations Rice had, to basically go in the NFL and set records with career catches, yards, receiving touchdowns, total touchdowns, and all-purpose yards. Sorry, Randy. I have to go with, Jerry Rice in this case. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Do you agree what Randy Moss said, or do you guys think that there were other great wide receivers that were probably bar better than those three combined? But I don't think that there was another wide receiver that could pretty much do what all three of those guys could do during the respective primes of their careers. So that's pretty much what I have. You guys let me know what you think in the comment section below. And with that, I'm out. Peace.